Imagine suffocating in the absolute dark. Your lungs burn, not from smoke, but from an invisible, toxic gas rising from a mountain of human waste. You are waist-deep in excrement, scraping the stone walls of a pitch-black pit directly beneath the most glamorous castle in Europe. One wrong step, one deep breath of the hydrogen sulfide, or one accidental spark from your lantern, and the concentrated methane gas will ignite, blowing you and the castle's foundation to pieces. Today, modern forensic archaeologists and paleopathologists dig through these exact same medieval cesspits. By analyzing coprolites, fossilized human waste, these historical detectives have uncovered a horrifying truth that Hollywood completely left out of the movies. The romanticized era of knights in shining armor and majestic queens was actually a festering, disease-ridden underworld. The very fortresses built to protect the royalty were in reality ticking biological time bombs that swallowed people whole. And the reason why? We're going to uncover the lethal engineering flaw of medieval cities. But first, we have to look at the lie we've all been sold. Think of a medieval castle. You picture grand halls, silk tapestries, golden goblets, and massive feasts. But there is one crucial element missing from this fairy tale picture: sanitation. Where did it all go? For the lords and ladies of the court, the solution was dangerously simple, and it was called the garderobe. To the naked eye, a garderobe looked like a small, claustrophobic closet protruding from the exterior stone wall of the castle. Inside was a wooden bench with a hole. But this wasn't just a toilet. It was a gravity-powered weapon of mass contamination. When a nobleman relieved himself, the waste would drop dozens of feet down a vertical shaft, splashing directly into the castle's moat. Yes, the moat. The very water source designed to protect the castle from invading armies was intentionally transformed into a massive stagnant ring of raw sewage. The psychological disconnect here is staggering. The royal elite believed they were separating themselves from the filth of the commoners by living in high towers, completely ignoring the fact that they were surrounding themselves with a lethal, festering soup of bacteria. During the summer months, the stench radiating from the moat was so violently overpowering that it could cause residents to pass out. But not all castles had moats. Many fortresses and early urban manors used deep, enclosed underground pits, cesspools, to collect the waste. And these pits didn't empty themselves. When the waste piled up so high that it threatened to spill backward into the castle itself, the lords had to call in the specialists. They had to call the men who worked the absolute worst, most degrading, and most dangerous job in human history. Enter the Gong Farmers. If you think your job is tough, you wouldn't last a single night as a gong farmer. The term gong derived from an Old English word meaning to go. These men were the medieval equivalent of hazardous waste disposal teams, but without the hazmat suits, without the oxygen masks, and without the safety protocols. By law, they were only permitted to work at night, after the sun went down and the city gates were closed. The upper class found them so repulsive that they were heavily restricted, forced to live in isolated fringes of the city, only allowed to transport the waste in complete darkness so the nobles wouldn't have to look at them or smell them. But the social stigma was the least of their worries. The true horror was the pit itself. A Gong Farmer's nightly routine required him to lower himself down a narrow, suffocating shaft into a literal cavern of decaying organic matter. Armed with nothing but a wooden bucket and a shovel, he had to dig out the compacted waste by hand. The physical toll was unimaginable. Modern forensic analysis of skeletal remains from the medieval working class reveals severe joint degradation, spinal deformities, and bone infections, many of which align with the brutal, repetitive labor of lifting heavy buckets of dense, wet sludge in cramped quarters. Yet the physical labor wasn't what killed them. It was the invisible enemies lurking in the dark. As the human waste decomposed in these unventilated, sealed stone pits, it produced massive quantities of noxious gases. Hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs, is a highly toxic, heavy gas that settles at the bottom of these pits. At high concentrations, a single breath of hydrogen sulfide will paralyze the olfactory nerves, meaning you suddenly stop smelling it. Seconds later, it paralyzes the respiratory center in the brain. The Gong Farmer would simply collapse into the filth and drown in the waste, entirely unnoticed by his crew above. If the toxic gas didn't get them, the methane would. Methane is highly flammable. Operating in pitch-black conditions, the farmers needed candlelight to see. Records show horrifying accounts of violent underground explosions, where the naked flame of a candle ignited the trapped methane gas, literally blowing the Gong Farmers to pieces and sending a geyser of human waste rocketing up through the castle toilets. For the privilege of risking asphyxiation, explosion, and deadly bacterial infections, they were paid relatively well. Sometimes up to 2 shillings a night, a small fortune for a laborer at the time. But it was quite literally blood money. The Gong Farmers had to haul this toxic sludge out of the city limits, dumping it into designated lay stalls or selling it to agricultural farmers as fertilizer. But as populations exploded and cities grew tighter, the system broke down completely. The underground pits overflowed. The Gong Farmers couldn't keep up. And soon, the dark, horrifying reality of the castle cesspools began to spill out onto the public streets. The elite thought they could contain the filth in the dark. But as the medieval forensic record shows, the nightmare was just beginning. Because the true biological time bomb wasn't hidden under the castle. It was about to rain down on the heads of every single citizen in the city. As the populations of medieval cities exploded, the cramped, walled-in streets became the ultimate dumping grounds. Imagine walking down a narrow alleyway in 14th century London, Paris, or Edinburgh. The sun is blocked by overhanging, multi-story timber houses. Suddenly, a window on the 3rd floor swings open above you. A voice shrieks, "Gardy Lou!" A crude bastardization of the French phrase "Gardez l'eau," meaning watch out for the water. But it wasn't water. It was an entire chamber pot of stagnant urine and human feces, hurled directly into the crowded street below. If you were incredibly lucky, the content splashed into the central gutter, a shallow, unpaved trench carved into the middle of the road. But these gutters were almost never flowing. They were perpetually clogged with the rotting corpses of stray animals, discarded butcher scraps, and unimaginable household garbage. The thick, squelching mud that peasants trudged through every single day wasn't actually mud. It was a dense, fermenting paste of raw sewage. To help clean the streets, City officials would actually release massive herds of pigs to roam freely, hoping the animals would consume the rotting garbage. Instead, the pigs simply added their own massive amounts of waste to the lethal mixture, creating an apocalyptic level of filth that covered the boots and clothes of every citizen. This perpetual, stomach-turning environment birthed what historical forensic experts now recognize as a massive biological time bomb. You have to remember that medical science was virtually non-existent. The leading scientific consensus of the day was the miasma theory. Doctors and esteemed scholars genuinely believed that diseases were not caused by bacteria, viruses, or contaminated water, but by bad air or foul smells. They thought that simply smelling the horrific stench of the city would instantly infect you with a fatal disease. To combat this invisible enemy, wealthy individuals would walk through the streets holding nosegays, small bouquets of tightly wrapped, heavily scented flowers and herbs, pressed firmly against their faces. They believed the sweet smell of the flowers would filter out the deadly miasma. They were wrong. Dead wrong. The true killers were microscopic, and they were breeding by the trillions in the contaminated water supplies. Because the underground cesspits and street gutters constantly leaked into the surrounding soil, the groundwater became entirely saturated with human waste. When a medieval citizen pulled a wooden bucket of water from the local well to drink or cook, they were pulling up a highly concentrated cocktail of cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever. Entire families would suffer agonizing, violently dehydrating deaths, completely unaware that their daily cup of water was the murder weapon. But the ultimate punishment for this era of absolute filth came in the form of a bacterium known as Yersinia pestis, the Black Death. The mountains of garbage and oceans of sewage in the streets created an infinite perfect breeding ground for black rats. These rats carried fleas, and these fleas carried the bubonic plague. Because the cities were so densely packed with trash, the rats essentially lived inside the walls, under the floors, and in the beds of the citizens. The resulting pandemic wiped out an estimated 30 to 50% of Europe's entire population. The bodies piled up so fast in the streets that the Gong Farmers, the same men who shoveled human waste in the dead of night, were often forced into a new, even more horrifying job: carting away mountains of rotting human corpses on wooden wagons. Yet, out of all the horrific ways to die during the Middle Ages, there is one historical event that stands out as the absolute most bizarre, undignified, and terrifying disaster of the era. It proves that absolutely no one, not even the highest-ranking, untouchable royalty, was safe from the consequences of their own filth. The year was 1184. The place, the Petersburg Citadel in Erfurt, Germany. King Henry VI, the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, had called a massive, highly important political summit to settle a bitter, ongoing feud between two powerful noblemen. To attend this grand meeting, over 60 of the most powerful princes, knights, and aristocrats in the empire gathered in a massive hall on the second floor of the church rectory. These were men clad in heavy chainmail armor, draped in expensive velvet, and covered in gold jewelry. They were the absolute elite of the medieval world. men who believed they were chosen by God to rule over the peasants. But there was a fatal engineering flaw. The room they were sitting in was built directly over the citadel's massive ancient cesspit. For years, the caustic, acidic fumes of concentrated urine and the intense moisture of the human waste had been silently eating away at the wooden floor joists holding up the room. As the political debate raged on, the combined weight of dozens of men in heavy armor was simply too much for the rotting wood to bear. Without warning, a deafening crack echoed through the hall. The entire wooden floor instantly disintegrated. In a matter of seconds, over 60 of the most powerful men in Europe plunged backward into the pitch-black abyss. They didn't just fall. They plummeted directly into the massive liquid pool of decades-old human excrement at the bottom of the pit. The chaos that followed is almost too horrific to comprehend. Because of the sheer weight of their chainmail armor, many of the knights sank immediately to the bottom like stones, instantly drowning in the thick, suffocating sludge. Others desperately tried to swim, clawing at each other in the pitch black, choking on the toxic methane gas. King Henry VI only survived by a sheer miracle. He happened to be sitting in a stone alcove built into the outer wall, which didn't collapse. He clung to the iron window bars, staring down at the unimaginable nightmare below, until he was eventually rescued with ropes and ladders. Over 60 nobles perished that day. It remains one of the most darkly ironic disasters in human history. The architects of the medieval world literally swallowed whole by the very filth they refused to deal with. So, the next time you picture a grand medieval castle, or imagine yourself as a brave knight riding through a bustling cobblestone city, remember the horrifying truth lurking just beneath the surface. The romanticized Middle Ages was an era of profound darkness, where the absolute worst way to die was constantly waiting right under your feet. It took the horrific sacrifices of the Gong Farmers, the devastating loss of millions of lives to waterborne diseases, and disasters like the Erfurt latrine collapse to finally force humanity to wake up. These grim events laid the terrifying groundwork for the modern sanitation systems we take completely for granted today. The sparkling clean water pouring from your faucet was paid for in blood, sweat, and centuries of unimaginable filth. Would you have what it takes to survive even 24 hours in a medieval city? Or would the great stink break you? Let me know your ultimate survival strategy in the comments down below. And if you want to uncover more dark, terrifying, and completely true historical mysteries, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what we dig up next.